Joe Biden is facing what could be the first major diplomatic crisis of his presidency. Moscow has recalled its ambassador to the U.S. for consultations after Biden confirmed he thought Russian President Putin was a killer. The U.S. president was speaking in an interview with ABC News. He also promised to hold Vladimir Putin accountable for meddling in the U.S. elections.
Director of National Intelligence.
This was the interview that galvanized two huge nations, the U.S. and Russia, when in an exclusive interview with ABC News, George Stephanopoulos asked President Joe Biden,
So you know Vladimir Putin, you think he's a killer?
I do.
So what price must he pay?
The price he's going to pay, well, you'll see shortly.
The interview comes as the United States is thought to be preparing new sanctions against Russia for its meddling in the election. At an earlier meeting, Biden made a pointed remark to Putin.
You said you know he doesn't have a soul.
I did say that to him, yes. And his response was, we understand one another. I wasn't being a wise guy. I was alone with him in his office. That's how it came about. It was when President Bush had said, I've looked in his eyes and saw a soul. I said, looked in your eyes, and I don't think you have a soul. And looked back at me and said, we understand each other.
It's unclear what kind of a response Moscow will have, but no doubt U.S.-Russia relations have seldom been this low.
Let's bring in our correspondents following this story for us. We have Emily Sherwin in Moscow and William Glucroft here in Berlin. It's good to see you both. Emily, let's start with you there in Moscow. Joe Biden said he considers Putin to be a killer. What exactly is he referring to?
Well, Joe Biden didn't make it very clear what exactly he was referring to, but it is clear that over Putin's time in office, there have been a whole list of prominent killings of Kremlin critics, or at least attempted assassinations. For example, there's the opposition or the critical journalist Anna Politkovskaya, who was killed in 2006. There was the opposition politician Boris Nemtsov, who was killed in 2015. There's the attempted assassination and poisoning of Sergei Skripal in 2018. And last year, the attempted poisoning of opposition politician Alexei Navalny as well. Now, Putin's critics have always squarely blamed him for those killings, or at least his system. Of course, Putin himself has always denied any ties with these killings and with other killings. Of course, investigations as well have never linked any of those murders or attempted murders to Vladimir Putin himself.
Okay, William, let's talk about this U.S. intelligence report that essentially blames Moscow for meddling in the U.S. elections. To what extent does it say that Russia actually tried to sway the vote?
Right, Moscow and other countries as well. But when it comes to Russia, the report basically outlines a campaign of misinformation, a campaign of influence peddling, placing misleading or outright lies into news media, into social media accounts, influential people on social media, right-wing media, also peddling favors with many Trump associates. The report doesn't actually outline or specify, at least the declassified version, doesn't specify any specific examples or names, but one of the biggest examples being pointed to is Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, meeting with Ukrainian lawmaker Andrei Derkach, who has since been sanctioned by the U.S. and has been accused of basically being an agent of the Russian state, helping put these kind of ideas, these anti-Biden ideas, a lot of these lies we've heard or misleading facts about Biden's and Biden's family's role in Ukraine and corruption allegations, none of which have been any evidence has been found to that effect. But putting those kinds of ideas, those kinds of stories out there into the U.S. media and social media to cause confusion, to stir up trouble. We saw that in 2016. One major difference was in 2016, it appeared that Russia also tried to actually hack election infrastructure, and that was not the case in 2020. They maintained more of a influence in social media and misinformation campaign.
So, Emily, we know that the Kremlin has broadly rejected accusations of election interference, but have they addressed any of the specific allegations in this report?
No, there was a pretty standard denial that we heard from the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, yesterday. He called that report wrong, baseless, and unsubstantiated, and basically questioned the quality of the claims in the report. But I think the really big news here in Russia isn't so much the report. That's sort of seen as the usual accusations that are leveled at the Kremlin and at Russia that the Kremlin has denied over the years. The real news here is this statement about Putin being a killer. One parliamentarian today said that that is really a red line that the U.S. has now crossed, and the next step would only be for Russia and the U.S. to break diplomatic ties. You have to understand that this is essentially a personal insult that has been leveled at the Russian president in a country where even Putin's critics usually kind of make broad claims or broad criticisms against the Kremlin or against the government instead of touching the president himself.
Yeah, President Joe Biden certainly talking tough there. William, just quickly, if you can, he's said that there will be consequences for Russia. What exactly are we talking about here?
He was very vague, as we heard in that report, partly because he doesn't want to probably tip his national security hand, but also there's rather limited room that Biden and the United States can maneuver for punishing Russia. Sanctions are usually the go-to tool. There's many sanctions against Russia and Russian individuals with varying effects. It's quite easy for many Russians, especially wealthy Russians, well-connected Russians, to evade those sanctions. But U.S. officials are probably also going to look at other kinds of financial tools, Russian money sloshing around in Western financial institutions that they can maybe go after. And of course, building alliances, keeping a united front with the EU, with NATO, to present a united front with Russia that would make it harder for Russia to enact this kind of divide and conquer campaign that we've seen over the last several years, chipping away at U.S. allies, especially in Eastern Europe.
Our correspondents, William Glucroft here in Berlin, Emily Sherwin in Moscow. Thank you both very much.